There is a kind of person who moves through the world untouchable. Not because they are cold or disconnected, but because they have learned something most people never master: how to feel everything deeply while being controlled by nothing. These people are dangerous, not because they threaten others, but because they cannot be manipulated through the emotional weapons that control everyone else. What if your greatest power lies not in suppressing emotion, but in mastering it completely? We live in a world governed by emotional manipulation. Advertisers exploit fear and desire to sell products. Politicians weaponize outrage to mobilize voters. Toxic people use guilt and shame to maintain control. Social media platforms engineer envy and validation, seeking to keep you scrolling. And most people, completely unaware, are puppets dancing to emotional strings they cannot even see. They react predictably, controllably, angry when provoked, desperate when threatened, compliant when properly manipulated. They believe they are free, but they are slaves to every emotion that crosses their consciousness. The Stoics understood this slavery and spent their lives breaking free from it. They did not become emotionless robots. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of their philosophy. They became people who could experience the full spectrum of human emotion without being commanded by it, who could feel deeply without falling apart, who could care passionately while remaining unbreakable. And in mastering their emotions, they became truly dangerous, impossible to control, impossible to manipulate, impossible to break through the emotional leverage that controls most of humanity. Marcus Aurelius felt grief when his children died, yet continued ruling an empire with steady wisdom. Epictetus experienced the pain of slavery and physical abuse, yet maintained an inner freedom that his captors could never touch. Seneca faced exile, loss of wealth, betrayal by those he trusted, and eventually execution, yet remained philosophically composed through all of it, his peace untouchable by external chaos. What did they possess that allowed them to remain sovereign while others were destroyed by far less? They possessed emotional mastery, not suppression, not denial, not the brittle stoicism of someone pretending not to feel. They had cultivated the ability to observe their emotions as phenomena arising within them rather than as commands that must be obeyed. They could feel anger without becoming angry, experience fear without being controlled by fear, notice desire without being enslaved to desire. And this capacity made them dangerous to anyone whose power depended on emotional manipulation. Think about your own life. How often are you controlled by emotions you did not choose? Someone says something that triggers anger, and suddenly you are reacting, defending, escalating, not because you decided this was the best course of action, but because anger hijacked your response. You feel anxious about a future event, and that anxiety dictates your present behavior, stealing your peace and narrowing your choices. You experience desire for something, and that desire becomes a compulsion that overrides your better judgment. You are not making decisions, emotions are making them for you. This is the normal human condition, so common that we barely recognize it as slavery. We call it being authentic, or following your heart, or honoring your feelings. But the Stoics would call it what it actually is: being controlled by forces you do not understand, reacting mechanically to stimuli like a puppet responding to strings. And they would tell you that there is another way, a way that does not require you to stop feeling, but does require you to stop being commanded by what you feel. The path to emotional mastery begins with a recognition that changes everything. Emotions are not you. They are experiences that arise within your consciousness, temporary states that come and go like weather, reactions based on interpretations that may or may not be accurate. You are the awareness in which emotions appear, the consciousness that observes them, the decision maker who can choose how to respond to them. This distinction, between you and your emotions, is the foundation of all Stoic power. Most people are completely identified with their emotions. When they feel angry, they are anger. When they experience fear, they are fear. There is no space between the emotion and their sense of self, no gap in which choice could occur. The feeling arises and immediately becomes action, with no conscious decision in between. This is not freedom. This is mechanical reactivity, the same pattern that controls animals and unconscious humans. You are capable of more. Epictetus taught this through a simple but profound practice. When an emotion arises, label it. I am experiencing anger. Not, I am angry. That is identification. But I am experiencing anger. That is observation. This subtle shift in language creates a massive shift in consciousness. It puts space between you and the emotion, reminds you that you are the one experiencing it rather than being it, creates room for choice about how you will respond. Before we go deeper into the practice of emotional mastery, consider this. If you are tired of being controlled by your reactions, if you are ready to become dangerous to those who rely on manipulating your emotions, subscribe to this channel. We are teaching the ancient art of inner sovereignty, not through suppression, but through mastery. Not through becoming less feeling, but through becoming more conscious. The Stoic understanding of emotion is sophisticated and far ahead of its time. They recognize that emotions arise from judgments, from the interpretations we make about events, not from the events themselves. This is crucial to understand. The event is neutral. Your interpretation of the event creates the emotion. And because you control your interpretation, you ultimately control your emotional response, not immediately, not easily, but definitively through practice and understanding. Someone insults you. That is the event. You feel angry. That is the emotion. But between the event and the emotion lies a judgment. This person has wronged me. They have diminished my status. They deserve punishment for this offense. This judgment happens so quickly, so automatically, that it seems like the insult directly causes the anger. But the Stoics would show you that the judgment is your creation, and therefore the anger is also your creation. Change the judgment, and you change the emotion. What if your judgment was different? This person is operating from ignorance and pain. Their words reveal their character, not mine. Their opinion has no bearing on my actual worth. Same event, different judgment, completely different emotional response. Not anger, but perhaps compassion, or perhaps complete indifference. You have not suppressed the anger. You have eliminated the false judgment that created it. This is the Stoic method. Address emotions at their root, which is always a judgment about what has happened. This does not mean you never feel negative emotions. It means you understand where they come from and can examine whether the judgments creating them are accurate. Sometimes the judgment is correct, something genuinely harmful has occurred, and the emotional response is appropriate. But often, the judgment is based on ego, on false beliefs, on unconscious programming, on social conditioning. And when you examine these judgments in the light of reason, they often dissolve, taking the inappropriate emotion with them. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly, examining his reactions to determine whether they were based on truth. Someone betrayed him, that happened. The judgment, I have been wronged and must seek revenge, creates anger and suffering. But another judgment is possible. This person has acted according to their character. They will face the consequences of their character. My peace does not depend on their punishment. Same betrayal, different judgment, vastly different emotional consequence. And Marcus, through rigorous practice, learned to choose the judgment that aligned with wisdom rather than with ego. But emotional mastery goes deeper than just examining judgments. It involves understanding what emotions are trying to tell you, extracting their wisdom without being controlled by them. Fear often signals that you are approaching something important, something that matters to you. Anger often indicates a boundary has been violated or a value has been threatened. Sadness often shows you what you care about through the experience of loss. These emotions contain information, but that information is not a command. You can feel fear and still act courageously, extracting the information that this situation requires careful attention while refusing the command to retreat. You can feel anger and still respond thoughtfully, noting that a boundary needs addressing while declining anger's demand for immediate retaliation. You can feel sadness and still continue functioning, honoring what you have lost while refusing to be destroyed by loss. This is emotional mastery, using emotions as information while maintaining sovereignty over your response. The person who achieves this becomes dangerous in ways that are difficult for the emotionally enslaved to understand. They cannot be provoked into reactions that serve their enemy's purpose. They cannot be paralyzed by fear that others weaponize to control them. They cannot be seduced by desires that others dangle to manipulate them. They move through the world responsive but not reactive, feeling but not controlled, engaged but not enslaved. And this makes them unpredictable to those who rely on emotional manipulation as their primary tool. Watch how manipulation works. Someone wants you to do something you do not want to do, so they trigger your guilt. If you are not emotionally masterful, you feel the guilt and comply, acting against your own interests to relieve the uncomfortable feeling. But if you understand emotional mastery, you feel the guilt, examine whether it is based on actual wrongdoing or merely on someone else's weaponization of your conscience, and then choose your response based on reason rather than discomfort. The manipulation fails because you are not controlled by the emotion they tried to trigger. Or someone wants to destabilize you, so they provoke your anger. If you react automatically, you become angry, say things you regret, damage relationships, perhaps even sabotage your own goals. They have won by making you dance to their tune. But if you have mastered your emotions, you feel the anger arise, recognize it as a reaction to provocation, decline to act on it, and respond instead with calm clarity or strategic silence. Your refusal to be provoked is more powerful than any angry response could be, and your opponent has no further strategy because they were counting on your reactivity. This is why the Stoics called emotional mastery the ultimate power, not because it gives you control over others, but because it prevents others from controlling you. In a world where most people are slaves to their emotions, the person who has mastered theirs operates at a completely different level. They are playing a different game, one where external circumstances and others' manipulations have lost their power to dictate internal state and subsequent behavior. Seneca wrote extensively about this, describing how the wise person goes through life like a rock in the ocean. Waves of emotion and circumstance crash against them constantly, but they remain unmoved, their center unshakable. This is not rigidity. The rock does not resist the waves, it simply is not moved by them. It allows the waves to come and go, to crash and recede, while maintaining its fundamental stability. This is the image of emotional mastery, not fighting emotions, not suppressing them, but remaining centered while they arise and pass. The practice of achieving this mastery is demanding but straightforward. It begins with awareness, noticing when emotions arise rather than being immediately swept away by them. This requires you to develop an observer's stance, a part of your consciousness that watches your experience rather than being completely absorbed in it. You feel anger beginning to rise, and simultaneously you notice anger is arising. This simple act of noticing creates the gap where freedom lives. The next step is investigation. When you notice the emotion, ask yourself, what judgment is creating this? What am I telling myself about this situation that is generating this feeling? Often, Just asking the question begins to dissolve the automatic quality of the emotion. You start to see the machinery of your own mind, the way you create emotional responses through interpretation, and this seeing itself is liberating. You are no longer unconsciously reacting, you are consciously experiencing and choosing. Then comes the choice. Is this emotion based on accurate judgment? Is the response proportional and helpful? Does acting on this emotion serve my values and long-term interests? These questions are not meant to suppress legitimate emotions. Sometimes anger is appropriate, sometimes fear is wise, sometimes sadness is the right response to loss. But they distinguish between emotions that serve you and emotions that control you, between reactions that are wise and reactions that are merely automatic. Epictetus would drill his students in this practice constantly. Someone would come to him complaining about being upset, and he would ask them to examine exactly what judgment created their upset. They would blame external circumstances, and he would relentlessly redirect them to their own interpretations. You are not upset because this happened. You are upset because you judged this as terrible. Change your judgment, change your experience. This is within your power. This is where your freedom lives. The students often resisted this teaching because it placed responsibility for their emotional state squarely on their own shoulders. It is easier to blame circumstances, to be a victim of events, to claim that your reactions are inevitable given what happened to you. But Epictetus would not let them hide in that comfortable helplessness. He insisted that their judgments were their own, that their reactions were their responsibility, that their emotional state was ultimately within their control through the careful cultivation of wisdom and awareness. This teaching becomes even more powerful when applied to the emotions that modern culture tells us to trust unconditionally. We are taught that our feelings are sacred, that we must honor them, that suppressing them is psychologically damaging. And there is truth in this. Suppression does create problems. Denial of feelings leads to dysfunction. But the Stoics offer a third way beyond expression and suppression: mastery through understanding. You do not suppress anger by pretending you do not feel it. You master anger by understanding what beliefs create it, examining whether those beliefs are true, and choosing your response based on wisdom rather than on the feeling itself. You do not suppress fear by forcing yourself to act without feeling it. You master fear by feeling it fully while recognizing it as information rather than as a command, then acting according to your values rather than according to the fear's demand. This is the subtle but crucial distinction. The Stoics feel their emotions as fully as anyone, perhaps more fully because they are not afraid of their feelings and do not need to suppress them. But they have learned not to be controlled by those feelings, not to let emotions dictate behavior, not to confuse feeling something with needing to act on it immediately. This creates a way of being that is both deeply feeling and completely sovereign, emotionally rich but strategically wise. The power this creates in practical life is immense. In relationships, you can love deeply without becoming desperate, can care profoundly without being controlled by need. You experience the full richness of connection while maintaining your center, never losing yourself in the other person, never sacrificing your sovereignty to maintain the relationship. This paradoxically creates healthier relationships because you bring wholeness rather than neediness, presence rather than desperation. In your career, you can be ambitious without being driven by fear, can pursue goals without being attached to specific outcomes, can work hard without deriving your entire sense of worth from professional success. You care about your work while recognizing it as one part of your life rather than as the measure of your value. This freedom from desperate attachment often leads to better work because you are creating from abundance rather than from fear of inadequacy. In conflicts, you can stand firm without being controlled by anger, can set boundaries without needing to punish others, can protect yourself without being consumed by hatred for those who threatened you. Your responses come from clarity about your values and boundaries rather than from reactive emotion, which makes them more effective and less damaging to your own peace. You can be strong without being cruel, firm without being reactive, protective without being vindictive. Marcus Aurelius faced this test constantly in his role as emperor. People betrayed him, disappointed him, took advantage of his trust. He could have been consumed by anger, could have ruled through reactive vengeance, could have let every slight and every failure poison his judgment. But he practiced emotional mastery, feeling his reactions while not being controlled by them, responding from philosophical wisdom rather than from wounded ego. And this made him not weaker but stronger. His decisions were better because they were not clouded by reactive emotion. The transformation from emotional slavery to emotional mastery is gradual and requires patience with yourself. You will fail repeatedly. You will be swept away by emotions even after years of practice. You will react before you remember to observe, will be controlled before you remember you have a choice. This is normal, expected, part of the process. The practice is not to achieve perfect control immediately, but to gradually increase the percentage of time when you remember you are not your emotions, when you create space for choice, when you respond rather than react. Each small victory strengthens the capacity. Each time you feel anger and pause before acting on it, you build the muscle of self-mastery. Each time you notice fear without being paralyzed by it, you prove to yourself that feelings are not commands. Each time you experience desire without being enslaved to it, you demonstrate that you can feel without being controlled by what you feel. And over time, these small practices accumulate into a fundamentally different way of being in the world. The person who has cultivated this mastery develops a quality that others can sense but may not be able to name. There is a groundedness, a stability, a quality of being unmoved by things that would shake most people. This is not coldness. They may be warm, engaging, emotionally expressive. But there is something at their core that is solid, that cannot be manipulated through emotional leverage, that remains centered regardless of external pressure. And this quality commands respect in a way that demanding respect never could. People instinctively recognize when they are in the presence of someone who cannot be controlled through the usual emotional mechanisms. They may not consciously understand what they are sensing, but they feel it. Their usual manipulation tactics do not work. Their attempts to provoke get no reaction. Their guilt trips find no purchase. Their flattery does not blind. Their anger does not intimidate. And in the presence of this unmanipulability, they have two choices. They either respect it and relate authentically, or they leave in search of easier targets. This is why emotional mastery makes you dangerous, not because you are threatening, but because you are free. Free from the strings that control most people, free from the predictable reactions that make humans easy to manage, free from the emotional slavery that keeps the majority locked in patterns of reaction and regret. This freedom is threatening to systems and people that depend on emotional manipulation to maintain power. But it is liberating to you and to anyone who genuinely cares about you. Seneca understood this deeply. He watched people destroy themselves through unmastered emotion, talented people ruined by anger, wealthy people made miserable by envy, powerful people enslaved by fear. And he saw that their external circumstances were not the problem. The problem was internal. They had never learned to master their emotional responses, to see their feelings as information rather than as commands, to create space between stimulus and response where choice could occur. And without that mastery, all their external advantages could not give them peace. The Stoic practice of emotional mastery includes specific techniques that you can begin implementing immediately. Start with the morning meditation that Marcus Aurelius practiced. Before you begin your day, remind yourself that you will encounter difficult people and difficult situations. You will face challenges to your patience, tests of your equanimity, provocations designed to trigger reaction. Prepare your mind for this reality rather than being surprised and thrown off balance by it. This preparation creates resilience. When the difficulty comes, you recognize it as expected rather than as a crisis. Throughout the day, practice the pause. When you feel a strong emotion arising, pause before acting on it. Even a breath's worth of pause creates space for awareness. In that space, notice what you are feeling. Name it silently. This is anger. This is fear. This is desire. The naming itself creates distance, reminds you that you are the one experiencing the emotion rather than being the emotion itself. Then ask, what judgment is creating this feeling? Is that judgment accurate? Does acting on this emotion serve my values? This practice is awkward at first. The emotions move so quickly that you forget to pause, forget to observe, find yourself already deep into reaction before you remember you meant to be conscious. But with practice, the pause becomes more automatic. You catch yourself earlier in the emotional sequence, create space before you have already acted on the feeling, gradually shift from being reactive to being responsive. In the evening, practice the reflection that Seneca recommended. Review your day and examine your emotional responses. Where did you remain centered? Where did you lose your composure? Where were you controlled by emotion rather than choosing your response? This is not self-criticism. It is honest assessment, the practice of a craftsperson examining their work to find where improvement is possible. Learn from your reactions without judging yourself harshly for being human. The goal is not to become perfect, emotionless, completely controlled. The goal is to gradually increase your capacity to feel deeply while being controlled rarely, to experience the full spectrum of human emotion while maintaining your sovereignty over how you respond to what you feel. This is not suppression. Suppression creates psychological problems because you are trying to deny reality. This is mastery, the cultivation of wisdom about your own internal processes and the development of capacity to choose your response. As you practice, you will notice certain emotions are easier to master than others. You might find that you can observe anxiety without being controlled by it relatively easily, but anger still sweeps you away. Or you might maintain equanimity in the face of criticism but lose your center when you feel rejected. This is normal. We all have emotional patterns that are more deeply grooved, reactions that are more automatic. Focus your practice on your specific challenges rather than expecting uniform progress across all emotions. You will also notice that mastery is not linear. You will have periods where you feel you have achieved significant control, where you navigate challenging situations with wisdom and calm. Then something will happen that completely overwhelms your capacity, and you will react as poorly as you ever have. This is not failure. This is the reality of being human. The practice is to return to awareness after you fall away from it, to recommit to mastery after you have lost it, to learn from every experience rather than expecting yourself to be beyond challenge. The deeper you go in this practice, the more you realize that emotional mastery is not about controlling your feelings but about understanding them so thoroughly that you are no longer their victim. You begin to see emotions as natural phenomena, arising based on causes and conditions, teaching you something about your own beliefs and values, but not requiring you to act immediately on what you feel. You can feel anger and investigate what boundary was crossed rather than attacking what triggered you. You can feel fear and examine what you are protecting rather than running from what threatens you. This investigation reveals layers of yourself that were invisible when you were simply reacting. You discover beliefs you did not know you held, values you had not consciously chosen, patterns inherited from childhood or absorbed from culture. And in discovering these, you gain the power to change them if they do not serve you, to keep them if they align with your conscious choice, to shape yourself deliberately rather than being shaped by unconscious programming. Marcus Aurelius saw this clearly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The strength he spoke of is not the strength to control the world, to prevent loss, to ensure everything goes your way. It is the strength to remain centered regardless of what happens, to maintain your character in the face of any circumstance, to be free internally even when externally constrained. And this strength comes from emotional mastery, from learning to work skillfully with your own mind rather than being a slave to its reactive patterns. The transformation this creates is profound and multidimensional. In your internal experience, there is more peace because you are not constantly at war with your own emotions, not fighting what you feel or being destroyed by it. There is more space because you have created distance between stimulus and response, between feeling and action. There is more freedom because you are not controlled by the manipulations and provocations that govern most people's behavior. In your external life, relationships improve because you bring presence rather than reactivity, respond thoughtfully rather than defensively, maintain your boundaries without attacking others. Your work becomes more effective because you are not paralyzed by fear of failure or driven by desperate need for success. Your decisions improve because they come from clarity rather than from reactive emotion. Your influence grows because people sense your groundedness and are drawn to it even if they cannot articulate what they are sensing. But perhaps most importantly, you become dangerous to those systems and people that rely on emotional manipulation to maintain their power. The advertising that would have triggered your insecurities and driven you to purchase finds no foothold. The political rhetoric designed to provoke outrage and tribal loyalty leaves you unmoved. The toxic person who controls others through guilt and fear discovers their tactics are ineffective with you. The social pressure that keeps most people conforming to expectations that serve others' interests but not their own has no power over you. This danger is not aggression. You are not threatening anyone. But you are free, and freedom is always dangerous to those whose power depends on others' enslavement. When you cannot be controlled through fear, cannot be manipulated through guilt, cannot be provoked through anger, cannot be seduced through desire, you are operating outside the normal mechanisms of social control. You are thinking for yourself, choosing your own path, maintaining your own values regardless of external pressure. And this makes you unpredictable, uncontrollable, ungovernable in the ways that matter most. Epictetus understood this from direct experience. As a slave, he was subject to complete external control. His owner could do almost anything to his body, could restrict his freedom of movement, could threaten and punish him. But Epictetus discovered that there was a realm of internal freedom that no external power could touch. His own mind, his own judgments, his own responses to what happened to him. By mastering his emotional reactions and maintaining his philosophical principles regardless of circumstances, he achieved a freedom that his owner could never take away. This is the secret the Stoics offer. True freedom is not found in external circumstances but in internal mastery. You can be externally constrained while internally free, or externally unconstrained while internally enslaved. Most people live the second way. They have political freedom, economic options, social mobility, yet they are slaves to their emotions, controlled by their reactions, imprisoned by their unconscious patterns. They have the form of freedom without the substance of it. The person who cultivates emotional mastery achieves the substance of freedom regardless of the form their external life takes. They may face constraints, difficulties, limitations, but they remain free in the sense that matters most. Their peace does not depend on circumstances. Their center cannot be shaken by events. Their character cannot be compromised by pressure. They have achieved sovereignty over the only realm where sovereignty is truly possible. their own mind and their own responses. This is not easy to achieve, and it is never completely finished. Even Marcus Aurelius, after decades of philosophical practice, still struggled with emotions, still had to remind himself of basic principles, still fell short of his own ideals sometimes. But his practice gave him access to a quality of life that his untrained contemporaries could never reach, a life where external chaos and personal loss could not destroy his fundamental peace, where his character remained intact regardless of what happened to him, where he was free in the deepest sense even while carrying the weight of an empire. You have access to the same practice, the same transformation, the same freedom. It begins with the simple recognition that you are not your emotions, that feelings are experiences arising within your consciousness rather than commands you must obey. It continues with the patient practice of creating space between stimulus and response, of investigating the judgments that create your emotions, of choosing your responses based on wisdom rather than on automatic reaction. And it culminates in a way of being that is both fully human and extraordinarily free, feeling everything deeply while being controlled by nothing, engaged with life completely while remaining unbroken by whatever life brings, dangerous to manipulation while being gentle with those who approach in good faith. This is the Stoic promise, not that you will stop feeling, but that you will stop being a slave to what you feel. Not that life will be painless, but that pain will not destroy you. Not that you will control the world, but that you will master yourself. As we close, understand that this mastery is the work of a lifetime, but the benefits begin immediately. The first time you pause before reacting in anger, you taste freedom. The first time you feel fear but act according to your values anyway, you experience your own power. The first time someone tries to manipulate you emotionally and you recognize it and decline to play along, you discover your danger, not to others, but to the forces that would control you. If you are ready to begin this practice, to cultivate emotional mastery and claim the freedom it offers, subscribe to this channel and join others walking this path. We are learning the ancient art of feeling everything while being controlled by nothing, of moving through a world of emotional manipulation with sovereignty intact, of being fully human and fully free simultaneously. The Stoics showed us that this is possible, demonstrated it through lives lived under extreme pressure and through philosophy practiced under the harshest conditions. You face different challenges in a different age, but the principles remain the same. Master your emotions through understanding, not suppression. Create space between what you feel and how you respond. Choose your reactions based on wisdom rather than on automatic programming. And gradually, inexorably, you will become dangerous, not threatening, but free. Free from the manipulation that controls others. Free from the reactive patterns that create unnecessary suffering. Free from the emotional slavery that keeps most people perpetually off balance and easily controlled. The world will try to provoke you, to trigger your reactions, to control you through your own emotions. And you, aware, practiced, masterful, will feel those attempts, will experience the emotions they try to trigger, and will choose your response anyway. Not from perfect control, not without struggle, but from increasing capacity to be the author of your own behavior rather than a puppet dancing to emotional strings. This is the Stoic path. This is the power that mastery offers. This is the life that waits for you when you finally become dangerous through the mastery of your own inner world.